The so-called act of creating space involves directing a sufficiently powerful force at a specific point in the void and striking that point with the force. This force then expands from that point, forming an internal space similar to a bubble. Expanding that bubble is referred to as creating space. When the bubble becomes large enough, the space within it can become a world in its own right. Such a world is called a spatial world, Yuan Cheng explained to the crowd. The difficulty of creating space varies. For instance, in a lower dimension, the power of the divine soul stage is enough to create space. In an advanced dimension, one needs the power of the heaven transformation stage, and in a superdimension, only the power of the heaven-reaching stage can accomplish this. For the 10 superdimensions, the threshold lies at the 3 minor tribulations level. As for the Great Thousand Worlds, the requirement is the 8th grade supreme. In the dimensional records I manage, this is indeed the case, Yu Xiaozheng affirmed. The alliance leaders nodded as well. Governing countless lower dimensions, they were well informed about various dimensional data. Yuan Cheng's words were not far off the mark. The higher the dimensional level, the stronger the spatial stability. The space becomes harder to disturb and tear, which makes creating space more difficult and breaking through dimensional shackles even harder, Yuan Cheng continued, shifting his gaze to Wei Tiandi. In the Great Thousand Worlds, creating space should be a trivial task for a heavenly supreme, Yuan Cheng remarked to Wei Tiandi. It's not entirely trivial. Those who have created space before know that the larger the space, the harder it is to create, requiring even greater power as support, Wei Tiandi replied. Very well. Your first task is to create a space here. The internal space only needs to span a few dozen miles, Yuan Cheng instructed. The crowd was taken aback, puzzled by Yuan Cheng's sudden command for Wei Tiandi to create space. A space of a few dozen miles is not difficult to create, but because it's so small, it cannot form a self-sustaining world, Wei Tiandi noted. However, creating such a small space is exceedingly simple. Boom. As Wei Tiandi finished speaking, an overwhelmingly fearsome aura surged from his body. Yet, he did not unleash his full strength, using less than 1% of his power. Even this fraction was equivalent to the mid-stage Earth Supreme, highlighting the staggering disparity between an Earth Supreme and a Heavenly Supreme. Rumble. The immense spiritual energy of heaven and earth surged across the entire sky continent, alerting even the guarding armies stationed around its perimeter. However, as they approached the barrier enveloping the sky continent to investigate, they were intercepted by several Earth Supreme Elders from the Great Thousand Alliance. Within the barrier, the Alliance leaders sat cross-legged in midair, watching the forthcoming events with great anticipation. To be honest, ever since I broke through the dimensional shackles, I haven't attempted creating space, Wei Tiandi said, focusing his attention on a point in the void. Slowly raising his palm, the spiritual energy within a radius of 10,000 miles surged towards him, condensing into his palm. Spiritual energy exists diffusely in heaven and earth. When gathered, its density can increase 1,000-fold, forming a mist-like gaseous state. With a spirit gathering array of the 6th level or above, many great factions can achieve this. Compressing the mist-like spiritual energy 100-fold further transforms it into a liquid state. It is said that in the Great Thousand Worlds, the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy possesses an 8th-level spirit gathering array capable of such transformation. This liquid spiritual energy rivals the supreme sea of a supreme expert. Compressing liquid spiritual energy another 100-fold creates an even more potent solid state. A fingernail-sized fragment of solid spiritual energy exploding can shatter a 100-foot mountain. The phenomenon of heaven and earth exhibited by Earth Supremes utilizes solid spiritual energy, showcasing its immense destructive potential. Even without an explosion, its sheer pressure can suppress ordinary supreme-level experts effortlessly. In Wei Tiandi's palm, the result of this intense condensation was solid spiritual energy, also known as the phenomenon of heaven and earth. The phenomenon can take various forms, large or small, resembling any object within heaven and earth. In Wei Tiandi's case, it manifested as 2 slender needles radiating terrifying energy fluctuations. Swish. With a flick of Wei Tiandi's fingers, the 2 needles formed from dense spiritual energy shot out, carrying immense energy. They pierced through the void in opposite directions, creating long arcs across the sky. Two spiritual needles streaked through the air at near light speed, crossing tens of thousands of meters in an instant. The precise contact of their needle tips created a collision of world-shaking proportions before the eyes of all onlookers. The collision of the spirit arrays could lead to one of two outcomes. First, even the slightest deviation in precision could cause the needles to explode, collapsing the void within tens of thousands of meters. The second possibility, Yuan Cheng's gaze focused on the sky above. He saw the two spirit arrays annihilate each other upon contact, and the resulting terrifying force didn't shatter the space, but instead forced a fist-sized spatial bubble into existence in the void. For those skilled in space manipulation, it was clear. This was the prototype of a newly formed space. Not too hard, huh? Wei Tiandi remarked with a smile as he looked at the spatial bubble in the sky. It was his first time creating a space, and he had succeeded. Swish. Wei Tiandi's figure flickered as he appeared directly in front of the spatial bubble. Extending his hand, he placed it on the bubble. The next moment, everyone witnessed Wei Tiandi vanish. Those experienced in space manipulation understood. Wei Tiandi had entered the bubble. Buzz. As Wei Tiandi entered, energy ripples emanated from the bubble. In no more than 10 breaths, the fist-sized bubble began to expand rapidly. Within moments, it grew to a colossal size of 10,000 meters, with a diameter equivalent to 70 li. When the space reached its immense size, the expansion halted. From afar, it appeared as a massive floating sphere. Then, the sphere began to tremble and an orange flame. The most primordial fire accompanying the birth of any spatial world emerged from the sphere. This flame was ranked fourth on the 100 million flames ranking. The primordial flame. Ordinary primordial flames held little significance, but those born alongside the creation of superdimensions gradually revealed their formidable nature. The primordial flame ranked on the 100 million flames ranking was said to have been born with the creation of the Great Thousand Worlds and was rumored to be under the control of the Pill God clan, though this was unconfirmed. Within the trembling spatial world, the weak primordial flame dissipated over time. Its fading allowed the searing world to cool gradually, while the enormous spatial sphere began to fade. Within dozens of breaths, it disappeared entirely from the heavens and earth. However, the spatial world had not vanished. It had merely concealed itself within the void, as two separate worlds cannot exist visibly to one another. Its disappearance signified the completion of space creation. Buzz. In the sky, spatial distortions rippled, and a figure clad in golden robes walked out. It was Wei Tiandi. The spatial world you requested, spanning tens of li, has been created. Although it turned out slightly larger than expected, Wei Tiandi said, casting his gaze toward Yuan Cheng. About a third larger, but that's negligible, Yuan Cheng replied as he stared into the void behind Wei Tiandi, where he knew the spatial world lay. He nodded and then spoke in a tone that left Wei Tiandi and the alliance leaders dumbfounded. Next, continue creating spaces. I'll need 3 more worlds, spanning hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands of li. What? What do you even need so many spatial worlds for? Yuan Cheng's demand drew an incredulous reaction from Lu Feng of the Sword Domain. The other alliance leaders shared similar bafflement. Yuan Cheng, whose heaven transformation stage strength had earned him the top spot on the extraterritorial evil clan's kill list, was truly an enigma. Let's move quickly. I suspect someone's patience is wearing thin, said Nan Tianzi, the ever-silent leader of the Great Thousand Alliance. Why don't you do it yourself? Wei Tiandi retorted, glancing at Nan Tianzi with some irritation. He was beginning to suspect this Great Thousand Alliance meeting was nothing more than a ploy. To ensure the credibility of the experiment's results, the Great Thousand Alliance will not participate in the construction of the spatial worlds. Otherwise, we'd be accused of fabricating results. Heh, such rigorous standards for an experiment? Interesting. I'll lend a hand then. The Undying Lord, known as the Gravekeeper, stepped forward. I'll handle the largest spatial world. I'll join too. I'll construct the spatial world spanning thousands of li, said Shui Yuan, the leader of the Western Heaven Palace. Since the Guardian Realm Lord finds it tedious, Feel free to rest, added Sacred Feather, leader of the Sacred Alliance, stepping forward. Matters should follow a proper sequence. What I should handle, I will handle myself. The actions of the various alliance leaders left Wei Tiandi momentarily stunned and a little embarrassed. However, Wei Tiandi's words carried little authority. Almost as soon as he finished speaking, the Undying Lord and others soared into the sky, each employing their unique methods to begin opening spatial realms. Damn it, they really are fighting me for it. Wei Tiandi cursed in frustration. With a flash of his figure, he followed suit. Massive waves of spiritual energy spread across the heavens and earth. When four heavenly supremes, all of extraordinary strength, acted simultaneously, the oppressive force was enough to cause the sky and earth to seem to sink. The other alliance leaders, who refrained from taking action, could only shake their heads helplessly at this scramble to claim space. Boom! High above, the simultaneous creation of 3 spatial realms caused the surrounding tens of thousands of miles to fill with turbulent spiritual energy. After more than 10 minutes, a spatial realm spanning hundreds of miles was eventually opened through what appeared to be a coincidental effort by Wei Tiandi and Sacred Feather. Half an hour later, Western Heaven Palace Master Shui Yuan emerged from the void. Behind him, a spatial realm thousands of miles wide had been successfully created. This larger space took longer to open than the earlier hundreds of miles, indicating that the larger the space, the more challenging it was to create. 2 hours later, the Undying Lord opened the largest spatial realm of all, a realm spanning tens of thousands of miles, comparable in size to a lower dimension. The Undying Lord estimated that with his late-stage heavenly supreme strength, opening a mid-level lower dimension would take roughly a week, while opening an advanced lower dimension would require nearly a year. Opening a super dimension would take at least 100 years. This disparity left the Undying Lord both amused and exasperated. With his overwhelming power, he could easily destroy a super dimension, yet creating one remained an arduous endeavor. When the Undying Lord emerged from his newly opened spatial realm, everyone noticed his left hand was not resting behind him as usual, but instead held an orange flame. It was the primordial flame, born from a spatial realm comparable to a lower dimension. Though still weak, it posed a threat to divine soul stage experts. Despite its small size, the Undying Lord never underestimated anything simply because of his own immense power. The Undying Lord's gaze shifted to a figure behind Yuan Cheng, a mid-stage divine soul stage expert. This is for you. Refining it will benefit you far more than refining spirit beast essences. With a flick of his finger, the primordial flame flew toward the divine soul stage expert, who promptly channeled spiritual energy to envelop the flame and absorbed it into his chi-si. Thank you for your generosity, Senior, the divine soul stage expert said gratefully after receiving such a boon. Now that the 4 spatial realms have been opened, let's get to the main topic, Yuan Cheng said while stretching. Having done nothing for nearly 3 hours, he was naturally feeling a bit fatigued. Yuan Cheng's casual demeanor left the alliance leaders somewhat at a loss. They couldn't comprehend how this man could treat matters of world survival with such indifference, as though the destruction of the world was insignificant. As you requested, the 4 spatial realms have been created, Wei Tiandi and the others said, addressing Yuan Cheng. We hope you'll stop beating around the bush and get straight to your so-called experiment. It seems you're growing impatient, Yuan Cheng remarked, finishing his stretch. He looked at the group and asked, how sturdy do you think these spaces you've created are? Or rather, what level of strength would be unable to escape from them if trapped? The alliance leaders were momentarily stunned by the unexpected question, but quickly reflected. As individuals equivalent to the peak of late-stage, heavenly supreme power, they believed even the small spatial realms they had created couldn't be easily shaken by ordinary supreme-level experts. Judging by your expressions, you all seem very confident in the durability of your creations, Yuan Cheng said, a slight smile tugging at his lips. Oh. Wei Tiandi acknowledged softly, his gaze lifting toward the void high above. Through that void, he perceived 4 spatial worlds of vastly different sizes, 70 miles, several hundred miles, several thousand miles, and tens of thousands of miles across. Fixing his eyes on the 4 spatial worlds, Wei Tiandi waved his sleeve, distorting the space around them. Instantly, 4 spatial passages appeared, spaced 10,000 feet apart. These passages allowed entry into the temporarily created spatial worlds, and their sizes varied. Some a mere yard wide, others several yards, 10 yards, and even tens of yards. To help you distinguish the sizes of these spatial worlds, Yuan Cheng looked up at the 4 spatial passages, each several yards wide, before turning to glance at the 4 individuals behind him. As his faint smile spread, everyone present felt their hearts tremble. Your next task is to enter those spatial worlds. Once you step in, I will have the passages sealed. You will rely on your strength to emerge from them. After exiting the smallest world, you'll proceed to the one spanning several hundred miles. If anyone can make it out of that, they'll move on to the even larger spatial world, and so on. Those who manage to exit the largest world will receive a reward of 1 million drops of supreme spiritual liquid. Boom. Yuan Cheng's announcement sent shockwaves through the crowd. Other than Nan Tianzi, the leader of the Great Thousand Alliance, who remained relatively composed, the other alliance leaders were visibly stunned. Even Yu Xiaojiang and the others stared at Yuan Cheng with an almost crazed disbelief. Was he insane? The 4 individuals behind Yuan Cheng, one at the spirit movement stage, one at the spirit wheel stage, one at the divine soul stage, and the strongest only at the heaven merging stage, were far from capable of distorting space, let alone breaking through a spatial realm created by a heavenly supreme expert. Spatial manipulation itself came in varying levels of difficulty. The simplest being spatial distortion, followed by spatial traversal, spatial fragmentation, spatial creation, and finally, the near impossible, breaking spatial shackles. Yuan Cheng was actually sending individuals incapable of even basic spatial distortion to attempt the highest level of spatial manipulation, breaking through dimensional shackles. Was this a joke? Yuan Cheng, my friend, are you sure you're not drunk? Because just hearing this makes me feel drunk. Lu Feng couldn't hold back his disbelief, practically face-palming as he spoke. How about we make a bet? I wager they'll never make it out of the spatial worlds, not even the first one. 1 million drops of supreme spiritual liquid says they won't make it. If they do, I'll pay you on the spot, Wei Tiandi teased, pointing at Yuan Cheng with a smirk. The banter between Lu Feng and Wei Tiandi prompted the other alliance leaders to cast skeptical glances at Yuan Cheng. Even the Undying Lord, who usually trusted Yuan Cheng the most, began to question if he'd lost his mind. Senior, those are spatial realms created by a heavenly supreme expert. How could we possibly make it out? The 4 individuals behind Yuan Cheng spoke hesitantly, their fear evident. They worried they'd be trapped forever, even if the alliance leaders might eventually release them. 1 million drops of supreme spiritual liquid, you say? Yuan Cheng ignored their fear, taking a deep breath before smiling. Raising a finger, he pointed to the smallest spatial passage and spoke calmly to the 4. Go. If you come out, the 1 million drops will be yours. All you need to do is sit down in those spatial worlds and focus all your spiritual energy. Do nothing else. And if you don't make it out within 10 hours, I'll have the passages reopened to let you out. Yuan Cheng added this to ease their nerves. Upon hearing this, the 4 exhaled in relief. Even so, carrying the weight of a 1 million drop wager was a daunting burden. Lord Wei, their strength is still too weak. Other than the one at the heaven merging stage, the rest can't even fly yet. I'll have to trouble you to send them in, Yuan Cheng said, turning toward Wei Tiandi. Hearing this, Wei Tiandi couldn't help but laugh. So, you're aware they can't even fly, yet you're sending them to tackle the limits of spatial worlds? Are you slapping yourself in the face? Buzz. Despite his amusement, Wei Tiandi complied. With a wave of his sleeve, a surge of spiritual energy wrapped around the 4 individuals and sent them into the smallest spatial world. I'm about to seal the passage, Wei Tiandi said with a chuckle. Seal it, Yuan Cheng replied. With that, Wei Tiandi cast Yuan Cheng a sidelong glance before sealing the spatial passage. Between heaven and earth, a profound silence fell. Everyone's gaze was fixed on the smallest spatial realm, spanning less than 100 miles. Almost all believed they knew the outcome, that the 4 individuals would not emerge. Yet, this silence lasted for less than a minute.